Yeah, some people
Or
they
also
Maurice
Mercury.
already, maybe from other events here in the Netherlands. I think the first time he was here in 2008
Mm,
when I published your book Neptune. That was the first time you you was here in the Netherlands, and then 2 years ago you was here also with our symposium, what I organized with my colleague Dick van der Mark. And
hmm.
that was also interesting and about the 12th house and the ascendant. So, just the most people I think you know already, Maurice, but maybe you can tell a little bit more about yourself. So, and the questions we talked about it before. You can put it in the chat, and then we will check sometimes. And in between, if it is at that point, you can ask Maurice maybe to ask a question, or maybe raise hand. That's my method in my school. They can do raise hands. When you go down, then you have reageren of reactions into English. En dan raise hand of hands opsteken, dan komt je handje bovenin. And then yeah, Maurice and I see you at the left side. So okay, thank you, Maurice. You are here, and really nice
Thank
to
you.
hear you again about your wisdom about evolutionary astrology, and now about the outer planets. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, yes, I've met some of you. I remember a little bit of your names, but forgive me if I don't remember everyone. Um, this is obviously going to be shared in English. So if you have any questions, things that you don't understand, or things that you'd like to share, use the chat box, not the Q&A section. And we'll try to get to the questions as they come. If there are bigger questions, we'll do them towards the end of the session. And indeed, my approach is evolutionary astrology, trying to use our charts to understand our soul journey. So we're not just here to survive. We're not just here, um, you know, to live in security, but to evolve, to become more conscious. And that's very much what the transpersonal planets are about. So it's an interesting, in English, there are two terms, the outer planets or the transpersonal planets. And the outer planets usually also include Jupiter and Saturn, all the gas giant planets. So perhaps transpersonal is a more specific term. And I will share with you some activities before we get into the material. Some of the offerings for now, you may know about my book on Neptune and the 12th house, which is translated into Dutch thanks to Peter. The first edition was translated by Peter. Now there's also a second edition in English, which you can find online. Um, if you can't find it, contact me. And this goes deep, into a lot of what we're going to talk about today, especially about Neptune. But it's a vast body of knowledge. I'm also, as you may know, teaching a more comprehensive program where, we go from beginning to end, basically, um, understanding theory and practice. So if there are classes you're interested in more specifically, you're welcome to check it out. I also wanted to let you know about a conference that somebody's organizing in Sweden on February 28th to March 1st. And that's going to be in English, so you don't need to learn Swedish. And it's a 2-day conference and then 2-day workshop. So check it out. The website is listed there. And so today's topic, the transpersonal planets. Excuse me. The reason I chose this topic is because there's so much to learn about them, and also because they're coming together. And it's a rare thing that all these transpersonal planets are forming aspects to each other. So it already started earlier this summer in June, July, and it will continue on and off pretty much into 2028. So Neptune is going to be in Aries. Pluto is already in Aquarius. Uranus gets into Gemini. And this coming July, there is a very graphic and powerful configuration where the three transpersonal planets, as well as Jupiter, will all be on the same degree in air and fire signs. So it forms this kind of trapeze with two trines and opposition and sextiles. When these outer planets come together, there is usually very important global changes, cultural changes. And, I want to step back a little bit and look at previous times they came together in a different way. So in 65, on the left side, there was a Pluto-Uranus conjunction that was sextile Neptune. That was also opposing Chiron at the time. So we often speak about the fact that there was a big conjunction between Pluto and Uranus, but it also included the sextile because Pluto and Neptune have been sextiling each other for a whole generation. And what happened, right, in 65, it's interesting to note that this is when what we consider to be Generation Z, Gen Z, excuse me, Gen X, started in 65 until 1980-ish. So it's the beginning of a whole new cultural generation. And the late 60s into the 70s, there were a lot of cultural changes, revolution, a change in the marriage structure. Obviously, we all know about sexual revolution that also led to the New Age movement becoming more prominent. It's when people wanted to find their own spirituality, not just through conventional religion, not just through church or whatever religion they were part of, but finding their own way to God, to the universe, to the higher truth, in independent ways. So that was a big break, a big cultural change that led to, the term, I'm spiritual, not necessarily religious. But in the United States, there were also a lot of social revolution, anti-war protests, civil rights movement to bring more equality between minorities and the rest of the population. Also, gay right movements. So it was a lot of changes in our consciousness, in the way we saw things, in the way we operated. And then the next time they came all three together was in another conjunction, Uranus Neptune, in the 90s, early 90s. And then it was also sextile Pluto. So it's interesting that both these times we have a conjunction in an air sign, excuse me, in the earth sign that sextile Scorpio. And obviously, what happened in 93, you have the internet revolution, you have the end of the Soviet Empire and many new countries. So the world changed on so many levels, politically, socially, technologically, and we have a start of a new generation. The middle of the 90s when Gen Z generation began. And these were the children who were born into the internet age. So they didn't know how to live without it. And you see how Uranus and Neptune captures this type of view and consciousness that is more global, that is faster, that is not regulated by time. So we are ahead of a similar phase and situation. Now, in the upcoming configuration, there is no conjunction, and the conjunctions are always the most powerful game changers. So will it be as strong? We'll see. We already have some experience of it in the course of this year. We know that we are on the verge of a major cultural change with new technology, with artificial intelligence that is about to kind of take us on a new paradigm. And so let's dive in. My purpose in this particular session is to not only understand what the transpersonal planets mean as a group, but also how each of them works in a different way, and how they can work also as pairs. For example, we are all born with a Pluto-Neptune sextile. I'm saying all, most of us, because this started in the 1940s. I'm going to share a slide about it. I'm going to come back to it, but just to look at it, these were all the different sextile. So it started in the early 1940s with Neptune in Libra, Pluto in Leo. The first exact one was in 1950, 17 Leo Libra. And then it moved into Scorpio Virgo, Sagittarius Libra, Capricorn Scorpio. And we can see how each generation has this Pluto Neptune sextile. And we are now in the last stretch. The last sextile is going to be on June 9, 2028. Pluto at 8 Aquarius and Neptune 8 Aries. After that, Pluto is going to slow down and Neptune continues in its own pace. But as Pluto slows down, Neptune is going to move away from the sextile until it will form a square. So for 80 years, pretty much, 85 years until 2028, um, all of us have that sextile. And then it's not going to happen again for hundreds of years. So my purpose as we explore these, the sextile between Neptune and Pluto is here. Now we also have a trine between Pluto and Uranus, and then an opposition to Jupiter. So this trine between Pluto and Uranus is the continuation of the conjunction that started in 65. The planet keep talking to each other as one move faster than the other. So Uranus moves faster than Pluto, and so it formed a sextile, and then it formed a square in the year 2000. And now it's at the trine phase. So in order to understand this trine, we have to go back to the time of the conjunction, because that's when things are seeded. The conjunction is when we plant the seeds. What happens with these seeds? We see it with a sextile, square, trine, and then opposition. The same thing with Neptune Uranus. We're now at the first sextile. And the original conjunction was this one in Capricorn. So there was a seeding time for that conjunction that is now coming to fruition in the coming years. So when all these cycles are synchronizing, we can hopefully better understand where is it coming from? What is the intention? How to make sense of all these forces, these big players converging together. And so let's start. What is a transpersonal planet? We categorize all the planets into different groups. The sun and the moon are luminaries. Then we have the personal planets, which are Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And then the social planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and then transpersonal planets. As you know, before we had telescopes, we only related to the 7 planets and luminaries. The transpersonal were not visible. That doesn't mean that they were not operating because we didn't know about them. But we found out about them in the late 1700s. First, we discovered Uranus. So this was a change in what happened to our consciousness, because as we discover these planets, it coincides with major cultural events as well. So we're going to unpack that. So I'm going to go briefly, excuse me, for this. We're going to go briefly into each category to better understand it. The sun and the moon represent how we personalize our lives. So life happens, right? Birds are flying, clouds are moving, the earth is spinning, babies are born, people die, wars, everything is happening all the time, everywhere. But the sun moon tells us, out of all these things, what is it going to be personal to me? So I live in the United States. I'm an astrologer. I was raised in this family. So all these things become part of my life. That's what the sun and moon is about, is what you will be attached to, what you take into your personal life out of all that exists. So it's your filter. It's how you internalize existence. So I may know intellectually that people go to space, but I'm not going to space, so it's not personal to me. I don't need to learn about rocket science. But whatever happens with astrology is more interesting to me because it's part of my life. So the sun and moon are obviously our control room where we filter in everything that we go through, all our impressions. So when you open the TV, which channel are you going to choose is the sun and moon. What are you going to remember? You went through many things, but what stays with you is your sun and moon. That's what you become attracted to, attached to, emotionally connected to. Now, the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, represent how we manage and organize our lives. Once we choose what channel to be on, once we choose where we want to live, what house we're going to buy, who we're going to marry, who is going to be part of our lives, then the Mercury, Venus, Mars speaks about how we get organized, how we find a job and get a loan in the bank and save money and, build our defenses. So Mars is our defense mechanism and our action, how we do things in our lives. Venus is how we sustain ourselves materially, how we work in the material world to survive in our body. We have enough food, all those things. Mercury is how we know what to do, learning things at school, learning how to drive a car, learning how to get the train from one place to another. So the personal planets help us build our life and make it work so that we can basically not get sick, so we can be safe and productive. Then the social planets represent how our personal life interact with society. Jupiter and Saturn are the teachers. When we want to find out what's right, what's wrong, what is just, what is fair, we learn from our parents that tell us don't steal, don't, lie, and be considerate and cooperate. And we learn what is true, what is valuable. We also learn from Saturn, Jupiter, what is success? What does it mean to be successful in life? Is it to be married? Is it to have a good job? Is it to be wealthy? Is it to be spiritually enlightened? Each person has a different education, a different culture, a different society that will direct them towards what is worth fighting for, what is worth developing, what is worth focusing our efforts towards. So Jupiter and Saturn represents, the bigger goals and the larger society and how we integrate and function in the greater spectrum of society. And so all this up to Saturn, from the moon, sun, all the way to Saturn, we're building our life. From finding food to having a family, to getting married, to having a job, to having all the things that sustain us. And then we reach that point, maybe when we are in our 30s or early 40s, when everything is in place. We are organized, we are stable, we're healthy for the most part. And then come the transpersonal planets. And things start to change more radically. Now, transpersonal planets are operating, since we were born. It's not that they wait until we're 40. But there is a collective experience around the end of our 30s into our 40s when all the transpersonal planets form an aspect to each other. So Uranus is opposing Uranus at age 42. Neptune is square itself. And for some of us, Pluto was also squaring itself. So there's suddenly a time where all the things we built is suddenly not enough. But why? It seems like we figured it out. It seems like we have a good life, that it's stable, that we have a good system going on, personal system and society system. But the transpersonal planets come and say, there is more to life than this. And there is growth that doesn't happen just physically. It's not just your body changing. It's your consciousness that is changing. You suddenly need to look at life differently. So they come into our lives to change our values, our perception, our understanding of what's right and wrong, and have a bigger picture perspective. So maybe I was born in a culture that told me astrology is a pseudoscience, it's wrong, it's stupid. And that's what I was educated to think. But then I have a Pluto, Neptune, Saturn activation in my chart. And I learned that astrology actually is real, that it reveals some truth about my life. And it gives me a deeper meaning of why I'm here. I'm not just here to survive or to be safe. I'm here to change people's lives. I'm here to bring more light into the difficulties. So it gives you suddenly an understanding that your life is linked to something bigger than yourself. This is why it's called transpersonal, because your personal life is not operating on an island. It's not separated from other people's personal lives. But you don't see it on a day-to-day, right? You don't know these people on the bus. You don't realize that what happens in Indonesia affects what happens in Holland and what happens in the United States. So we suddenly, through the transpersonal planets, we see the bigger picture. We step outside of our subjective personal reality to see another way, another meaning, a deeper, broader reality that is not just functioning on a practical level, but also on a spiritual level. Now, I want to clarify something that I think circulates in many astrology worlds, that the transpersonal planets are not affecting us personally, that they only affect generational changes. This is wrong, and you will feel it when you have a Pluto transit or a Neptune transit, that it's very personal and that you feel it emotionally. It's affecting you. But what does it mean that it's transpersonal? That it takes your consciousness from a subjective view, immediate view, to a more global view. So it's all about your growth and about the ability to step outside of yourself. That's the meaning of transpersonal. Does that make sense? Everybody's on board? We haven't lost anyone yet? Okay. So here are some understandings about them. In evolutionary astrology, we definitely associate the transpersonal planet as rulers of signs, something that some astrologers don't feel comfortable doing, but I can say from my experience, it works like a clock. It's very reliable. So Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio along with Mars. Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius along with Saturn, and Neptune, ruler of Pisces, along with Jupiter. And I'm going to touch on why. We don't have enough time to, to expand and unpack all of it, but I'm going to give you a glimpse. I also want to recommend, let me try to find it here. If you go to my channel, my YouTube channel, you will find a video called, so you have many videos, but you will find a video about the octaves. And there are 3 parts to this video. So here you have the octave part 1, Pluto and Mars. Then you have the octave part 2, Uranus, Mercury, and part 3, Venus, Neptune. So in that video, I expand on the meaning of the rulership. It's really good material that expands on what we're learning today. So check it out. And of course, I invite you to join the channel and support this work. So Pluto has a very eccentric orbit, and it can stay 11 years in a sign. It was only 11 years in Scorpio, but it can also stay 32 years as it will do in Taurus. Depending on how close it is to the sun, it's going to come and move faster. The total orbit is 246, 48 years, roughly there. Uranus is 7 years in a sign with a total of 84-year orbit. And Neptune is 14 years in a sign with a 165-year orbit. So what do you notice when we look at these numbers? That 2 Uranus cycles equal 1 Neptune cycle. Right? One stays 7 years, the other one 14 years. They're exactly half of each other. So when you have a Uranus return at 84, you also have a Neptune opposition. Always happens. So whenever you have a Uranus cycle happening, you have half a Neptune cycle happening at the same time. So they talk a lot to each other. But it also happens with Pluto. The Pluto-Neptune ratio is that 3 Neptune cycles equals 2 Pluto cycles. And 6 Uranus cycles equal 2 Pluto cycles. And it's important to see how they talk to each other because they are the game changers. They are Howard Sasportas, who was a British astrologer, called them the gods of change. Now, it's true, they are the gods of change, but we can say Saturn also leads to change. Mars also leads to change. So the change that is specific to the transpersonal planets is about consciousness. Okay? How do they work as a group? In order for us to grow, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto will challenge our security attachment. So we become emotionally attached to something. Emotionally attached to our home, to our family, to our possessions. Not only that, we're also attached to our ideas, to our religion, to our points of view. So attachments can be intellectual, material, emotional. They make us realize there is a greater reality beyond the personal circumstances. So you live in the Netherlands, you have your routine, you have your job, you have your family, but Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, when they come to town, they make you realize your soul is more than the life you have. There's a bigger plan. You are part of a larger reality. And whatever you do, again, affects everyone else. Now, why do I need that? I'm happy with my little life. I'm happy with my job and my wife and my TV and my vacation to Spain once a year. You know, it's all neat and organized and it works well. Why challenge that? Because there's more to life than this. And suddenly you learn, well, the hard way. Maybe you get sick and you have an ulcer. And you ask yourself, you know, why? Why me having an ulcer? Well, you ate pizza all your life. And now your body rejects it. So your little organized life is suddenly showing cracks and problems, and your health is not doing well. So your doctor tells you no more pizza. And you have to now think outside of your box. Well, they use pesticides. Well, I need a broader ecosystem. I'm looking at the quality of my food suddenly. I'm asking more questions. Can I change my diet in order to heal my body? So that's an activation of the transpersonal planet that takes you outside your comfort zone. Sometimes it's through a crisis, and you are forced to ask questions. And those questions lead to a greater awareness. Another thing can happen is that suddenly your wife cheats on you. You had your good marriage, you thought everything was done, that we all had our little place. But since suddenly she finds another lover and she's leaves you. And that's another shock that these transpersonal planets can bring. And then you're forced to ask questions. Why? Well, maybe she thought you were too controlling. Maybe you never asked her how she felt. All kinds of things. So through these activations, each one in their own way, you are forced to look into your routine, into your habits and attachment, into your security. And you need to feel suddenly that you're not as safe as you want it to be. And it forces you to ask those questions and learn something else about life. And that can happen in so many different ways, right? Your job can disappear, and your child can become a drug addict, and there could be an earthquake. Things happen that take you outside of your organized little life that you thought would last forever, and it doesn't. So what Uranus, Neptune, Pluto do is that they make you realize nothing is permanent because of evolution, because our consciousness needs to grow. So what they do, right, after you build your personal planet, social planet, and organize your life, they show you the cracks. They show you the blind spots, what you're missing, the things you thought you were in control of. And then you realize you're not in control. And the more you ask those questions, the deeper you can go into the transpersonal consciousness to see the interconnectedness of life, the unifying principles. And so maybe you're a Russian soldier and you suddenly realize Ukrainians are not your enemy. Maybe you're all connected. Maybe this war is an illusion, right? You look at things differently. So until we get to that perspective, you're going to have a reality where you're going to have opinions about how Ukraine should lead their lives and how Russians should lead their lives. or how people in Gaza should live their lives and how Israelis should do it. And there's going to be a lot of my territory, my security, and you're going to die for it. So when we go through the transpersonal experience, we see the bigger picture. Everyone wants to be safe. Everyone wants some land, right? So we see that our blind spots are not sustainable. We cannot stay in our ignorance. It works until it doesn't. You can live well in ignorance for a short period of time, but then you're going to face more and more problems. Things are not going to work. Your kids are going to get angry. Your spouse is going to rebel. You're going to be fired from your job, and you're going to have to get out of your ignorance. You're going to have to look at life differently. So, one comment here for Mireille, the forces of darkness propel your light. It allows us to, and the system to grow and move towards a higher purpose. Indeed. And so, while it's more not comfortable, it can be enlightening at the end of it. And I'm saying it doesn't always have to be through pain and crisis that we learn those lessons. We can have a Neptune transit or any of them and join a class where we learn something new and it blows our mind. We can meet someone who makes us understand new things. So sometimes it happens in a softer and gentler way. But it's up to us to also say yes, to open up to the change and to release those attachments when we're asked to. You know, when I was in my 20s, around, just be around the time of that Uranus Neptune conjunction, I started studying astrology. And then 1992 is when somebody came to me and said, do my chart. And you know, I didn't feel ready. I was just doing it as a hobby. But I took the challenge and I did the chart, and that led to more charts. And then somebody asked me to teach them astrology, and I could have said no. I could have said, you know, I'd rather have a safe job, because to be an astrologer is not going to be, you know, an easy income, especially in the 90s. Today, with the internet, things are more sustainable for astrologers. We know we can have these meetings through Zoom, and that helps us professionally. But back in the days, being an astrologer was a big risk financially, sustainably. So I could have said no, but I said yes, and I just went with it. I was inspired because it opened this new world, and it allowed me to help people as well. So it was both a therapy for me and a therapy for the clients. So sometimes it can happen more progressively if you say yes. to the challenge. Right? So rising above our emotional response, understanding the big picture. Let's say you're going through a crisis, in your marriage, and it's hitting that breaking point where, you start to fight for money and you start to fight for custody of the children, and it gets more and more difficult. So the transpersonal planets can make you realize, well, your place is not here any longer because there's more to you than this reality. Your marriage is too restrictive. And if your partner doesn't change, maybe it's better for you to find a new version of yourself, a more expanded version of yourself. But then, does it have to get ugly? Through the transpersonal planets, you can also not just feel threatened by your partner or by the other, but you can learn to see their reality, see their pain, and make it easier on each other so that you can shake hands even if you don't have to live together. The same way when we look at the wars going on, why are these wars possible? What sustains those wars is obviously a lot of financial incentives, but there's also an aspect of dehumanization. If I tell you the Russians are monsters, they want to eat you. And if I tell the other one, Ukrainians are thieves, and the only thing they want is to steal more territory, you are going to have an easier time shooting them. The way for wars to exist is to dehumanize, to turn the other as something dangerous, something ugly, something inferior. And that gives you more, conscience to destroy them. Now, this doesn't mean that there's no threat and that there aren't monsters out there. What is the balance between looking at the bigger picture and seeing the unity of it all versus also knowing that you cannot be naive, right? And you can't just give up the fight. So these are all questions that come into play when we are addressing those challenges. So let's start unpacking, what happened with Uranus. Uranus is the first planet that was discovered after the telescopes. March 13, 1781 by William Herschel in the UK. Now, as I said, Uranus was always there, even when we didn't know about it. But when we discovered it, there were also a lot of events in our culture that reflected the nature of Uranus. Now, how do we know? We find a new planet. How do we know what it means? First of all, it's given a name usually after some mythological figures. Now, several names were suggested for Uranus. I don't remember them now, but it wasn't the first option. But the one that stick, the one that was accepted, ended up being the name of the sky god in Greek mythology. And Uranus in astrology is everything about the sky, about space. So as we discover Uranus, we have telescopes now and we can look into space. And it's a whole new perspective about our reality. But it's also the time of the Industrial Revolution, right? When machines are now working faster than humans, more efficiently. And part of what energizes the machine is steam. So all the steam engines, steam is air. Uranus is air. Aquarius is air. Okay? So is it a coincidence that this planet was discovered during a time that was very Uranian in nature, when people moved from rural areas to the bigger cities? So there were a lot of migration. And because of that, also the quality of life improved. People could make more money, they could produce more. It increased productivity. This was also the time of revolutions, where we moved from monarchies, Leo, to democracies, Aquarius. So Uranus also brought this new perspective that in order to lead a society, we shouldn't just rely on one authoritarian leader, that we should have collective agreement. Okay? So this gives us a new perspective on governance. And this whole time, think about those, the Renaissance, when we had Newton and earlier on Copernicus and all these big scientific discoveries that lead to the age of enlightenment, the age of education, the age of science. Now, when we speak of enlightenment, light is Uranus. It's the lightning coming from the sky. So when you see the light bulb in your head and you have a new idea, eureka, it's very Uranian. It's a realization. But enlightenment is often considered to be a spiritual thing. But historically, enlightenment was the age of science. And it's actually a time where astrology fell out of favor. People were seeing astrology as, not a serious thing any longer, because it was very serious up to then. But it became a superstition because it wasn't fitting the scientific model. Part of what affected astrology was also the Copernican revolution that made people realize that the sun is the center, not the earth. When astrology looked at the earth as the center, people saw that as wrong. So it was tossed away the same way that many other things were tossed away. not realizing that there is a reason why astrology is geocentric, Earth-centric, but that's for later. So Uranus represents the higher mind. And of course, science. What does that mean, the higher mind? Why is it a sky god? Think about going higher. And that's a question for you. What happens when you climb on a hill? Or when you take the elevator to the New York skyscraper, the 80th floor of a building? What happens when you're not on an airplane? What happens? What do you think happens to us? You have a bigger view. Exactly. So the higher you go, the broader your view. The lower you are, the less you see. And that is exactly what Uranus provides for us, not just physically by going up the elevator, but psychologically, rising above. When you are in the thick of an emotional situation and you feel threatened and you feel that there's a big lion in front of you who's going to eat you, Uranus steps up the tree and sees the broader reality, that maybe the danger is not so imminent. Maybe that lion is just passing through, it's not after you. So a good illustration to see that is this meme where what's in front of you seems like it's the whole world. It's a wall, it's a rope, it's a trunk. But when you step above, you see the bigger body, and you see that the whole thing is actually an elephant. So when you're going through a Uranian transit, these are the things that need to happen. You need to detach emotionally so you can gain a higher mental perspective on things. You become more neutral. You are less attached to the outcome, to the situation. And the less attached you are, the more clarity you can have. So you're on your airplane and you see life on Earth from a different viewpoint. That's part of the higher mind. So Uranus represents all these things that you learn about life, about yourself, that gives you better perspective, better ideas, and allow you to find solutions, because that's the bottom line. Why do I need to know all this? Is because it helps me make better decisions. It makes me avoid crises and problems. I can be smarter. And at the end of the day, when we are higher and we have a better perspective, we can learn more about life, and we can also be more intellectually creative. This is where the innovation of Uranus comes in, right? And we start to understand illness differently. We start to understand love differently, wars differently. We start to see that maybe this person who I thought was my enemy is actually another human being trying to get by. trying to survive. Why am I so upset at them? So you learn to be more neutral about your perspective. Now, what else do you gain when you go higher? Something else happens. Think about being on the earth, even driving your car, and then think about a plane. And the bigger the plane, the higher it goes. Then after planes, you have space shift. What do you gain with altitude? Mireille, you're very good. You gain speed. Uranus not only makes you smarter, but it makes you faster. Why is speed important? Look at the technology, right? Back in the days, a computer was the size of a room, and to operate one thing, it took hours just to process information. Now you have everything on a tiny phone that gives you an incredible amount of information that is immediate, faster, faster, faster. And then what? What do we gain with speed? What happens when our computers are faster? What happens when our cars, when our planes, when our thinking goes faster? Why is that important? We develop faster. Again, compare this to a computer that could do one or two things because of speed, and now it can do many more things in the same amount of time. We create space. But we also transcend space. Think about this time, right? If we go back to 1993 with the internet, Uranus-Neptune conjunction, suddenly you get all the information you need fast. You don't need to go to the library. You don't need to travel. You can connect with people immediately. So the understanding of time and space completely changed with the internet. The speed of connection, the speed of operation changed the way our nervous system processes. This is why the generation who is born with this, in the 90s is wired differently. They think differently. They need different things. They have a different rhythm. They are part of this acceleration process, which has its problem, but that's the reality. So, during the Industrial Revolution, we had our first speed experience, right? We went faster. The machines could do things faster. Now we have the internet revolution, and coming up, we are in the thick of a artificial intelligence revolution, which will again speed things up. So what happens with Uranus is, with all this perspective, knowledge, understanding that can affect us, how we understand life, it also helps us um, solve problems. When I speak about going higher, another way to say it is we elevate the quality of life. Back in the days, people, women would more readily die of childbirth. People had more children, knowing that out of 6 children, only 2 would survive. So we have better medicine to protect us from medical crisis. And we have better technology to process things. We have more comfort. So what happens through these higher perspectives is we can manage each other better. This is why Uranus helps us also not only develop technology, but develop social justice. Because we elevate the quality of life for everyone, right? So, yeah. So the quality of life help minorities live better. Homosexuals don't have to fear for their lives, at least in some places. And people can study astrology or become homeopaths and do things that are not always part of what the system or the church agrees with. But there are more liberties, there's more tolerance. And the reason is Uranus. The reason is Uranus helps us see above our own attachments, that it's okay to let people be who they are, that we don't need to feel threatened by differences. And so there's more tolerance for people who have different color skin, who have different religions. It makes us more civilized on a social level. When we disagree with someone, we don't need to shoot them. That's something the United States needs to learn with gun laws here. But it's part of civilization. Freud, who was a Sun Uranus born, said, when we learn to fight with words instead of weapons, we know we have advanced in our civilization. So we're still fighting, but we're fighting with words. That is progress. So Uranus elevates not only to go to space, but it elevates the quality of life to a higher level. Now, what is the risk of Uranus? Right? Any suggestion? Too fast. Why is fast too fast? The warmth of the heart. Okay. So the heart is our emotions. Sun and moon, right? So if we go into Uranus land or space, we detach from the sun and the moon. Aquarius is the opposite side of the sun of Leo and the Cancer. So we can dehumanize, but we said that we can also have more tolerance. That we can learn to be more as a group. We can see life more collectively. Why does it dehumanize? So, one of the things that we need to understand is that we still have personal planets for a reason. As the transpersonal, yeah, as the transpersonal, release our attachments, we need to form new attachments. Okay? So, the sun and moon are still relating to how we make and connect with our lives. Let's use an example. If I have an Aquarius moon, right, or a moon Uranus aspect, that's exactly what's happening, is that the moon is very personal and Uranus wants to teach me how to detach so I can better understand my emotions. What do you do when you go to a psychologist? You do just that. You talk about your emotions. I was very angry. I was very jealous. That's the moon talking. And the therapist says, look at that. Let's look at the situation. Let's detach and see what made you angry, what made you insecure, so you can solve your relationships. So there's always perspective. In a positive way, a moon Uranus can show high emotional intelligence. People who are going to be more intelligent emotionally because they're going to understand their emotions. But the risk is with Uranus is that you go up and up and up and you don't know how to land. The elevator going down is broken. So that can lead to a situation when you are constantly neutral. Now, you have children, sun and moon, and your children say, I I need something. I want, my friend hurt me at school and I'm sad. And so the Uranian person will come and say, well, from a higher point of view, um, you're all united. And you shouldn't be upset about your friends hurting you because they're just a human being trying to, find their way. Does that help your child? Your child needs now personal safety. They need to feel seen. They need to feel that even though there are many children in the world, you're going to take care of them. And so when your child tells you, I'm in pain, It's not a good answer to tell them, but other children are dying in Africa. You shouldn't feel any pain compared to them. Even though it's true, you depersonalize to the point of not being connected any longer. And so you can have a reality that is dysfunctional for that same reason. So the moon and the sun bring it back to your life, to you. Your attachments are important. And so how do we negotiate between the transpersonal and the personal? Anytime the sun and moon is in aspect to one of them, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, that's part of the evolutionary lesson. How to balance your emotional life with your spiritual life. So here are some, visual illustrations, to kind of give the vibe of the speed and the team and the sky and the height and the modernity. Uranus is modern. Now, one of the things we can also ask ourselves is when we are on that very high level and closer to the sun, are we losing touch with the organic, with the simple pleasures? That's an issue. Neptune. How does Neptune work? Neptune was discovered in the middle 1800s, and named after the god of the seas, Poseidon, Neptune. At the time, you had the American gold rush. What do you think about the gold rush? All these pioneers who were coming to America were feeling like it's a new opportunity. They left Europe, which was saturated, which had, famine in Ireland and wars and whatnot. And they came to this place where there was suddenly a new ideal of democracy away from the monarchies. And then there's gold, which makes you feel like you hit the jackpot. You're going to get rich quickly. So Neptune represents uncharted territory, what is still untouched, raw natural resources, gold, oil, and things that are still virginal, still pure. So this whole illusion of get rich quickly and this whole sense of adventure, of openness to something completely virginal is also part of Neptune. What Neptune represents is something that we find out about our lives that existed, but we never understood it. We're born into this world, and it's already happening. The sun is rising every morning, and the sky is blue, and it's raining, and there are stars out there. We did not make any of that. So Neptune represents all the forces of life that are bigger than us, And they make things work even if we don't understand how they work. So there's something happening in this existence that I'm not even noticing that it's happening. Nobody is making sure the sun rises every morning. It just happens. I notice it. But do you notice when you eat something, what's happening in your body? How is your blood reacting? What is your kidney thinking about what you just ate? No. You just put the food in your mouth and it feels good and it relaxes you, and then you go about your business. But there's a whole thing happening inside that is mysterious to you, inwardly and outwardly. So Neptune represents all of life, the big mysteries, the things we know and the things we don't know. But it represents all the things that we did not create, that we cannot control, that we are just born into. We didn't decide to have 10 fingers. We just have them and we make use of them, but we never really thought, why 10 and not 6 or 13? It just happens. So all those things that just happen have a reason why they happen. Do we know the reason? Maybe a little bit. But Neptune, it relates to the big mysteries because of that. So you understand the relationship between Uranus and Neptune. Uranus wants to know, wants to have more science, find solutions. And Neptune is where everything is. So Uranus is constantly trying to get more out of Neptune. And the more I know, the less mystery there is. And what is the gain in that? Any clues? Why does Uranus need to know and go higher and explore more and ask more questions? So they can get even higher, and then what do we gain from that? Or think about awareness. The more you know, the more aware you become. Yeah, it gives you more control. Knowledge gives control, and control gives security. So the more I know, the safer I feel. Neptune is the exact opposite. You cannot know. What do you do then? Maybe you'll know later, back in the days, you give me more than you know. I understand something in myself, always searching. Okay. Overthinking. Uranus explains Neptune. Exactly. So Neptune represents all the things we don't know. Now think back in the days when we didn't have enough technology to understand nature. we used to have a lot of superstitions, and we lived in a more animated world because when it was raining, we looked at this as the gods are doing something. Or when there was an earthquake, you know, we thought it was the earth that is upset. So when we don't know how it works and why clouds, bring the moisture in a certain way and then create rain, etc., it becomes magical. So the less intellectual we are, the more magical it is, but also the less control we have. So Uranus wants to feel safer, wants to understand the weather so we can be more prepared. If we know when an earthquake is going to happen, we're going to have less destruction. Maybe we can prevent the earthquake, etc. So they complement each other. But understand this relationship that Neptune is beyond time. Neptune doesn't care about the Roman Empire or the Middle Age or AI and all these things. Neptune is just, I am. Life is going to happen, whether you spin on it or not, whether you live on it or not. There's going to be a sun, there's going to be a moon, there's going to be a galaxy, there's going to be all kinds of things that operate despite of your little dramas. I'm not interested in your little dramas, says Neptune. It's completely beyond you. To some extent, because Uranus does get into Neptune territory. And we learn more things. Maybe we're going to, there's always already technology to control the weather, which wasn't a thing before. So Neptune represents all the things that exist and that don't belong to anyone, but they belong to everyone. Like the air we breathe, it's just there. Everybody can breathe the air for free. At least we can still do that. The sunlight is there, and it helps us survive, and rain and soil to grow our food. So Neptune represents all these elements: fire, air, water, earth, that sustain life, and it's free for everyone. And nobody created it. It's not human affairs. It's just there. But how many of us think about it? Do I have enough oxygen today to breathe? Right? Or will the soil disappear and I'm going to be in the void in space? You don't. You just trust that there's going to be enough oxygen and that you're going to have the earth beneath your feet. And that if you get in the ocean, it's wet. And so, what did I use? What's the key word when you cannot control, but you need it still? You still need oxygen, but you can't control oxygen. What is an important function of Neptune? Trust. Yes. When you trust, you can surrender. So you trust all those things that I said. You trust that you can use your 10 fingers. You trust that there's going to be enough oxygen, enough soil, enough sunlight. And this helps you move on with your life. So the mode of operation, when you have a Neptune transit, or when your natal Neptune is in a particular place in your chart, that is where you need to trust because you cannot control those dynamics. What's the problem with that, right? What is the risk when that happens? We all need to trust. If you don't trust, you can't sleep. Every night when you close your eyes, you enter the Neptune world of being completely passive, of not being in control at all. And you have to trust that the sky is not going to fall on your head and that you are safe as you're in bed, unconscious. Trust in God, trust in creation and destiny, absolutely. What happens if you don't trust? Now, if your Neptune is not working, you lose trust. Then you have insomnia. Insomnia is a trust problem. It's melatonin, which is a Neptune hormone, but that hormone is secreted because you can trust. So when you have a lot of anxiety and you are afraid of letting go, a lot of things freeze in your life. You don't trust you can sleep. You don't trust you can have relationships. What are you trusting? What is the ultimate trust? And again, those of you who are not familiar, with this work, I take you back to the Neptune book because we unpack all this and each house and each sign. What does it mean? And Peter has copies in Dutch, if you're interested. But what is the trust about? Trust what? Trust the purpose, part of it. What is Trust in life. Yeah. Trust that everything is that it's meant to be. Unity. There's something underlying all that. When you say trust that everything is meant to be, it's very true. But it's also the trust that the universe is good. Trust that it's good. When you see in the Bible and God said, he created the first day and the second day and he said that it was good. Because if the universe is not good, we are in constant danger. And some people flip that way. They lose trust and they become very cynical. And, it creates a lot of psychological issues. So you can surrender at night. You can trust there's going to be enough air because you trust that ultimately, even if there's suffering, even if there are wars, even if animals eat each other and we eat each other, at the end of the day, it's for a good purpose. There's a good intention, evolution, health, well-being. So Neptune is about the fundamental trust that we can go through life difficulties knowing that ultimately there's a positive purpose. This is why Neptune represents our ability to be happy. Because the moment we lose that trust, we cannot be happy. It's impossible. So, in a very superficial way, Neptune also represents the movie industry. And what's in a movie? A happy ending. There's a fight, there's a war, at the end, the hero is recognized, or they fall in love, or something is resolved. So that's, our idea of a happy ending can also be, if we go by Christian faith, that all your suffering is going to be fine because you're going to go to heaven. So there's a happy ending. It's all for a good purpose. I mean, that's true for Islam as well. Or for the Buddhists, if you live without attachment and you follow this and this and that, you're going to move beyond suffering, the samsara, the ignorance, and you're going to be enlightened. And that's a happy ending. So we're all finding our Neptunian reason to be. It's very existential. Because if you lose that, then you lose your ability to face life, to go through problems. Everything, imagine that you live in a universe that's evil. Every struggle is not worth it. Why would you want to live? We have heaven on earth, if everybody understand what you're talking about, Neptune. Yeah. Connection to the divine. So this connection to the divine also means connection to something bigger than yourself. Connection to the force you cannot control. So you see how they're both operating very differently, Uranus and Neptune. Hope and disappointment. Now, why is there disappointment? If you trust in the good. Why is Neptune also relating to illusions? This is an illustration for Neptune. So if you see the surfing guy, it's riding the wave. You cannot control the wave, right? But you can ride it. It's very Neptunian. The lion and the lamb, the lion and the fawn, is when we understand that despite our appearances, we are actually needing to care for one another. Because if the lion doesn't care for the lamb and the fawn, the lion will starve. Okay. Neptune is also the things you cannot control, which means the things you're not managing. When you look at this trait that is kind of hodgepodge, chaotic, it's very Neptunian. Compare this to Uranus, which is clean, designed, um, refined, civilized. And then Neptune is more primal, chaotic. You see the roots of the tree growing everywhere, doesn't care, that there's a building there. So Neptune is about all these organic processes where, despite the fact that it's not micromanaged, it ends up working well together. When you drive in one of these big cities, in Asia or in the Middle East, where everybody's using their horn, and there are 10 lanes, and you have a horse in the middle, and in some ways it's totally disorganized, but everyone fits in. They find their space in nature, in the global hodgepodge. That's very Neptunian. Now, if you drive in Cairo or in one of these cities, you need a lot of trust, you know, because you throw yourself into the flow and you have to figure it out. And that's Neptune. Neptune is about improvising. You cannot plan, you cannot prepare with Neptune. So when you have a Neptune transit, you tell your client, go and learn surfing. You have to learn to improvise, to be in the flow, because you cannot see too far ahead. It's one step after another. What is this free hug image about? What am I trying to say here through this? Mireille is saying, learn pain needs something to grow and understanding. Yeah. You have to dare to enter, but there's somebody dangerous there, right? So there's this funny clown who is not very safe. If you are Neptunian, you may say, everything is good. I'm going to hug this clown, and this clown is going to steal my wallet or stab me. So this free hug, is it really free? Is there a price to pay for this hug? So there is the illusion of Neptune. The illusion of Neptune is that everything is free because the air is free and the light is free and everything seems to be free. But there's a lot of work for that freedom. Neptunian people don't want to see danger. They don't want to see pain. They see everything as good because they want to trust. And if there's danger, how can I trust? So when I see this shady situation with a free hug, and in my Neptunian mind, everything is good, I'm going to trust, and then I'm going to get in trouble. And then I'm disillusioned, and I feel like a victim because this person abused me, stole my money. So what are we saying? Should we trust or not? What I see here is that trust is dangerous. What is the solution? You need to develop lucidity to know if you can trust or not, and Pluto can help. Yes. But as a philosophical debate, can we trust that life is good or not? Right? If there are dangers, if there are thieves, maybe life is not good. Maybe life is bad. Okay. Uranus helps, Pluto helps. The bottom line, the big lesson with Neptune is to understand that life is ultimately good. It doesn't mean everything about it is easy. It doesn't mean there's no suffering. It doesn't mean there's no sadness and pain. But when we say life is good, it's not paradise. Neptune is holding on to paradise. So the lesson about Neptune is that even in pain, there is a good intention. Even in this dangerous situation, there's a good intention. And maybe the intention is to learn to say no, to learn to discern. Neptune wants to say yes, right? Neptune is yes, Pluto is no, Saturn is no. Counter forces. In other words, you trust life. That doesn't mean there's no danger. And that doesn't mean you don't need to take care of yourself. That's where Neptunian people fail because they want everything to be safe and good, and they cannot handle suffering. So this is a big lesson for Neptune, to not be naive. To trust is different from being naive. And let's go to Pluto then.
Maurice, do you
Yeah.
still want to break or something or not?
I think we need to go forward because
Okay, great.
we have a lot more to cover. Are
Yes.
you all okay, or do you need a break?
No, let's go. It's okay, but I was
Mhm.
only questioning you.
Thank you. Thank you. Life is good, but not all human beings are good. And it's not just human beings. You know, sometimes it's a natural disaster. Nobody's fault, but it's going to kill you. So there's suffering, there's discernment, there are lessons to learn. If if we live in the Neptune mentality that everything is good, then we don't need to evolve. We don't need to change. You know, we're already there. We are in paradise. That's the big discrepancy. And that's where Pluto comes in, where it's very important. But before we go into Pluto, I want to show you some Neptune-Uranus contrasts. So Neptune is the origin, you know, how life came to be before human beings were even walking the earth. Whereas Uranus is where we're going. It's the future. Now, it's not true that Uranus is only technology, right? But I'm using these images to give you a broad idea. This is another illustration. You know, you have big, civilized, fast, tall buildings. You have a lot of light. Electricity is Uranus, where you can have light. Remember, Uranus is light. You can have light in the darkness. But Neptune comes around when the building is abandoned. You know, once we're all dead, all these lights and buildings and fast moving everything is going to turn into a tree. It's going to be decomposed. So Neptune is always winning the end because it's what is permanent. And you see the dogs, right? That's how a dog used to be. That's how a dog looks like now because of genetic engineering, because of breeding practices. You know, they lost their muzzle, their nose, and they're suddenly furry. And is it good? Is it better? Sometimes. Sometimes we are over producing, over engineering. But Uranus also brings our comforts, right? It's good to have air conditioning when it's terribly hot outside, and it's good to have heating when it's freezing. So we shouldn't be overly romantic about Neptune being so perfect because it's harsh. Neptune is very primitive. Pluto. Pluto was discovered in the 1930s, in 1930 more specifically. And it was a very, very challenging time in human history. It was between the two world war. There was a huge economic crash that just happened in November 29. So the world was in not doing well. A lot of restriction, poverty, nationalism, and of course, you know, the rise of Hitler and the nuclear bomb that followed. So Pluto represents what? First of all, it's the lord of the underworld. Now, what does this mean? the underworld. The underworld is everything that we don't see, that is under the surface. Now, think about the other planets. Neptune is all the things we don't see because we don't know about them. It's the mystery. It may be something that's in front of you, but you don't see it because you don't know it. Whereas Pluto, you don't see it because it's under the surface. And Uranus, you don't see it because it's way up in the sky and you need an elevator. So they all bring something mysterious in that transpersonal reality. Where are the hidden truth? Digging deeper, seeing in the dark, detective. But the most important aspect of Pluto, psychologically, it relates to doing shadow work. Do you know what shadow work is? Anyone? Can you share your ideas about what is shadow work? What you don't see and know about yourself, but project on others. Uncovering what you don't want to see, admit about yourself. Yeah, deep inside yourself therapy, facing your blind spot. Absolutely. So, as a water archetype, Pluto takes us to all the places where we are the most vulnerable, where you are the most weak, your insecurities, your fear, your incompetence. People with strong Plutos can start their life having to face a lot of insecurities. That's why, Scorpio kids or Scorpio moon will be very afraid of abandonment, afraid of losing somebody. They grab their mother's foot tightly because they're afraid of separation. Experiencing the dark, exploring and digging until you understand darkness and light. Yes. Get in touch with your subconscious. Not only with your subconscious, but get in touch with your vulnerabilities. And that can make the subconscious conscious. Because many of us, go by, like we say, lead our little lives, but we don't realize how many insecurities we have. I was just having a reading with someone who, their mother had a lot of Cancer and Scorpio energy. And she would not let them grow up. Like her children, she wanted to take care of her children because she was afraid that the children would leave her and, once they get married and they have their life, that they would abandon her. So she kept them close and it became very suffocating. And so she didn't know that. She was just acting naturally, but her insecurity was the fear of abandonment. And that led to not letting her kids being freely out in the world. But once you do shadow work, you start to unpack those feelings, those fears. That's again a transpersonal experience where you're getting outside of your immediate reality, but instead of going higher as Uranus goes, you go down into the emotional, into the crevices. Now, remember what is underworld is also where all the roots of the trees are, right? So all the nutrients are actually in the underworld. In order for the tree to climb to the sun, it needs roots, it needs Pluto. Where do you put the bodies when they're dead? They are in the underworld and they become compost and they feed nature. So death feeds life. So this is the comparison of Uranus and Neptune. It's a very, organic thing. Uranus wants to go high, so it's the branches of the tree going up, reaching up to the sun. The higher I go, the more I can see, the closer to the sun, to the light. Uranus wants the light. But if you don't have the equivalent depth, the tree is not stable. It's going to fall down with the wind. So Uranus and Pluto need each other. Because if you only go down and you keep digging and digging and into your emotions and into your nutrients, you're never going to see the sun. So this hexagram, which is a religious symbol for many traditions in the East and obviously the Jewish tradition and many others, it's an old symbol of as above, so below. How to bring the higher consciousness and integrate it into the emotional reality. So Pluto, without Uranus, is constantly in the shadow. And that's when you touch the wounds and you do your therapy work, but you're always in that dark space. If you're only in the Uranian field, then you have all these lofty ideals, all these bright solutions, but you don't know how to bring them to reality. It remains theory without being integrated. So back to Pluto. The shadow work allows for transformation. You cannot solve a problem by going around it. You have to go through it. Death and decay nourishes life. We talk about compost. When something is dead, it's actually food. What we eat is dead, but it becomes food. And then what decomposes in the earth becomes nutrient for plants and life. So the loss and the renewal, this kind of needing to go through changes, to let something die in order for something else to thrive. transforming crisis into opportunity, regeneration, empowerment. Now, in this video that I showed you about the octave, Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Pluto. So Mars also rules Aries. And Mars represents our fuel, our energy, how much energy and life force, vitality we have. And we go, 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 build our lives. Then we reach Pluto. We reach the 8th house. And Mars is facing death. Suddenly, in the 8th house, all the things that I started in the 1st house in Aries are coming to an end. My work, my relationships, my religion. I suddenly see that I'm running out of fuel, that there's no more energy to sustain it. My marriage is dying. My job is going to fire me. So I'm facing these endings. And Mars is losing the battle. It's about to be extinguished. That's when Pluto comes in. And Pluto talks to Mars and says, you need to develop a deeper perspective. You need to change in order to get more energy, in order to continue your journey. So Pluto says, change or die. Your marriage can die, or you can revitalize it, or you can have a new relationship. But something needs to change. And that's how Pluto becomes the first transpersonal planet to take us from the personal Mars to the spiritual, to the transpersonal perspective. It seems odd that a planet that is further out actually rules a sign that is further in. If you look at the wheel, I'm going to capture the wheel here. But that's the message of Pluto and Mars ruling both Scorpio. You cannot have one without the other, because Mars alone cannot drive Scorpio. It needs the Pluto transformation in order to exist, in order to survive death.
We don't see your wheel or something.
Yeah, I'm looking at this chart that I was looking for.
Yeah, but you don't share.
Yeah, because I haven't found it yet, so here it is.
Thank you.
So in the classic wheel, we see the order of the zodiac. So we start with Aries and Mars, and it all works fine until we reach the 8th house in Scorpio. And that's where the existential crisis, that's when the first transpersonal planet comes into play. And that's when we move for the first time from our subjective reality to a more objective perspective. And that's why, after we go through this transformation, we are very happy in Sagittarius. And we are suddenly full of faith and optimism. Where does it come from, this optimism? It comes from the transformation that happened in Scorpio that gives us new powers, new understandings. And now we begin Sagittarius to Pisces, our spiritual journey. So Pluto was the catalyst that took us to the places that were the most painful, the most dysfunctional, the most insecure, to a regeneration, to a place of renewal, growth, and spiritual awakening. Some evolutionary astrology, I see it more as the transformation of the soul, because everything is the soul, the whole chart. But Pluto is when you become conscious of the soul, that you realize you have a soul, that you're not just living in this time and space. There's more to your life. And that opens the gate to Jupiter, to Saturn, Uranus, and the ultimate, you know, divine union. Okay? So that's, even though that's the paradox of astrology, that even though Pluto is the last one in the orbit, it actually is activated first in the wheel of the zodiac. In other words, how is Pluto different from Neptune? What would you say if we look at, we understand the difference between Pluto, Uranus, one pulls up, the other pulls down. What's the difference between Pluto and Neptune? What do you think? These are the illustrations for Pluto, right? The butterfly, transformation, the risk of destruction, going to the underworld, the snake, is good, takes us to the deep crevices, and then the rise of the Kundalini is very scorpionic. So trust is Neptune. Trust life, trust the good. Right. Yvette, you're onto something. Pluto is the power, the will, the force. Neptune is the flow. So if you have a Neptune transit versus a Pluto transit, what is the difference? What do you need to do? What's the message? With Pluto, dark night of the soul goes with fear to change. Wake up, open your eyes, open your heart. Okay. But in a simple way, with Pluto, you need to fight. With Neptune, you need to stop fighting. With Pluto, it's in your hands. You can make a difference. You can change your situation, get an education, go to therapy, cut these people out of your life. So there's more of an active quality to the transformation of Pluto. Whereas Neptune is about accepting you are not in control. And sometimes the solution for Neptune is to do nothing, to wait. So it's a very different mode of operation because Neptune is fate. Pluto is will, free will. So very different energies, but both obviously want are water related. They both deal with emotions and trust. So somebody said earlier, Pluto doesn't trust anyone because they see the shadows. They see the hidden motivation. When you're a Plutonian person, you see somebody who's very successful, very beautiful. One of these role models, sex symbols of movie industries, and they seem to have everything. They have money, they are pretty, everybody wants them, looks perfect. But if you're a Plutonian person, you're going to see their vulnerabilities. You're going to see where they are insecure. You're going to see through the shadows. You won't just look at the surface. It's the iceberg image. So that's very important to understand. Um, if we break them down, Pluto is a shadow work. It's an emotional transformation. You release attachment through the emotions. Uranus is stepping away in order to reflect, going to the higher mind. Remember, the brain is the highest organ in your body. That's where Uranus wants to go, to the mind, to the brain, and understand things. Neptune is about what you cannot change, what you need to accept. Remember, Pluto is what you can change, and Neptune is what you cannot change. Now, it's interesting that when you accept what you cannot change, you are changing. What you change with Neptune, you change your attitude, you change your mindset. And like I said, sometimes the solution with Neptune is just to wait. Your child is going through a crisis. You can't control it. Just be there for them. They need to go through it. You can't change it. That's part of a Neptune thing. If you are a Plutonian person, you're going to go at night and you're going to track where they are. And maybe you're going to save them, when they're in danger. So it's more engaged and active. So looking at all these, it's interesting to see also the relationship between Pluto and Neptune in their orbit. I mentioned to you that Neptune orbit in blue is 14 years. And that is very circular. It's a very stable orbit. Pluto's orbit changes. And on two occasions, Pluto enters Neptune's orbit. It's actually closer to Earth, closer to the Sun than Neptune. When did that happen? In our time, when Pluto was in Libra. Let me see the dates. Here. So these are the Neptune. Here it is. Pluto entered Neptune's orbit in 79 and left in 99. So for 20 years, Pluto was closer to us. Between 19 Libra to 10 Sagittarius. This is why it was only 11 years in Scorpio, faster than Neptune. The overall cycle of Neptune and Pluto is 494 years. They conjunct every almost 500 years, and each time it's 5 degrees away from the previous conjunction. So the earlier Pluto-Neptune was in 1398. The most recent one was in 8 Gemini in 1891, and the next one will be in 2300. So when I said to you, we are in the sextile between Pluto and Neptune, it all started at the recent conjunction. Recent is 1891. Now you realize all these conjunctions are happening in Gemini. The first one was 3 Gemini. The last one was 8 Gemini. The next one is 12 Gemini. So if you count 500 years each time in Gemini, how long is this cycle gonna stay in Gemini? 500 years, 6 times, it's about 3,000 years of Neptune-Pluto cycles in Gemini. Do you understand now why this cycle has influenced civilization? What happened after, in the late 1900s? That's when cars, airplanes were invented. We suddenly could travel. Suddenly when, everybody went to school, it changed our educational system and it changed our transportation system. So it changed, the 19th century with 2 world wars is one of the centuries that where everything developed at a much accelerated pace. So we have a couple of more 1,000 years of Gemini cycles. If you want to learn more about this cycle specifically, there's a workshop I'm offering, the 500-year cycle of Neptune and Pluto, which is fascinating, and it's not too expensive. And then there's a whole other one on the Neptune transit. So, it's on my website if you want to check it out. Before we close, I know we're on time. I just want to show you a chart so you can see all this. This is the chart for when we had the Copernican revolution, heliocentrism, when basically we realize that the sun is the center of the universe. Oops, sorry. So you see that the planets were where they are today. Pluto was early Aquarius. Neptune was in Aries. Jupiter was not in Leo, was also in Aries. And Uranus was in Leo, not in Gemini. But this is when the concept was finally integrated. So Copernicus wrote his book, but it wasn't immediately integrated. And so it took a while. So these are, I believe, this is the chart for the beginning of heliocentrism. Think about it in transpersonal terms, that suddenly we understand that we are not the center of the universe, that the sun is. What a transpersonal experience. And you have these outer planets in, in that interaction between one another. Looking at the universe very differently. So if we go back to 2026, what kind of revolution will change our perspective, will expand our consciousness? It can be very creative. But as you know, change comes. This also brings fear. Will we find out about other living organism in space, alien life? Will we be able to travel through time in a different way? We talk about artificial intelligence, which is one thing, but imagine that we suddenly find another Earth. How is that going to change our perception? So I hope this gives you food for thought and that you're going to have a blessed experience next year. And one way to enjoy this experience is an invitation to come to Greece. We're organizing a workshop, a retreat in a Greek island in August, right as this is all happening. So if you want stars, sea, soul, spa, check it out. But I wish you all, a wonderful new year, and we can take some time for quick questions, maybe a couple of minutes. Um, if anything is unclear or if you need some additional explanations. Thank you, Mireille. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Peter, for hosting and bringing us together.
You're welcome. Thank you for your sharings and also the cooperation we had. Really nice, great. So, but maybe there are questions from some people. You can raise your digital hand if you have more question. There we go. No questions? No.
Great.
Lot geloof ik. Wat is er even question?
When you have
So,
three transpersonal planets quite present in your chart, what does that do to a person? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we can see this as a more global energy, that someone who has a lot of these planets on angles, on the nodes, making a lot of aspects, they are going to change a lot in this life. It's like you're going to have multiple incarnations in one life because the change and the need to constantly go deeper and higher is constant.
Mhm.
So this life is less about being in the comfort zone.
Okay, thank you.
And there's also a question from Yvette. It's in the chat. Maybe you can read it by yourself. But this last chart falls exactly on my IC-MC axis. Could you something, I suppose,
So
say about
what
it?
is the degree of your IC?
Je kan je geluid aanzetten.
Hello, Maurice.
Yeah.
Nice to see you again. Yeah, it falls. My MC is 302 Aquarius.
So
So
Pluto's
Pluto
right
is
there.
on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it obviously depends on what's going on in your life. But this is a time, when Pluto is on an angle, but also when Pluto enters a water house, it's going to enter your fourth house, which relates to water house. It's all about transforming emotions. So it's about, if we speak of the end game, it's about emotional power. But this also means you're going to have to look at your vulnerabilities, at those places in the fourth house where you may feel insecure, where you may feel unsafe. So it's a place where you kind of look at your childhood and you look at your support system now and see what makes you feel safe, and does it make you feel safe still? Or do you need to change your perspective about that? So it can change where you live. It can change, what is important, your priorities in life. But it's definitely a ride where you get in touch with what has, made you who you are today, and if that is what you want to continue doing.
Thank you.
You're right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Maurice. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, then we will finish this thing. So I want to ask everyone to turn on their microphone.
Yep.
Yep. Everyone, microphone on? Not only Attila and Lotte. Okay, thank you. A big round of applause for Maurice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thanks
very
very
much.
much.
Maurice.
Thank you.
And I will
Very
send you
much,
the recording
Maurice.
also.
And
So
thank
and we keep connected also with email, and then yeah, let's see next year maybe we can do something else
Yeah.
together. Yes, that would be really wonderful.
Yeah.
So and thank you everyone to joining us and that you were here tonight. So that is really wonderful. And I'm wishing
Yes.
everyone a really great days in December and wishing
Happy New
you
Year.
Yes.
really wonderful 2026 with all the transits and the
Yep.
nice configuration we have in the sky. So thank you
Now
very much,
we're all
everyone.
ready now.
Yes. Bring it on.
Yeah.
That's a big thing to say.
Be careful what you ask for.
Exactly.
Many blessings. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very
Ciao.
much. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.